You are standing in a snow-choked forest in early 1944, boots frozen solid, rifle slung low, waiting for an order that does not come. The officer beside you unfolds a map stiff with cold. He traces a blue line with his finger and tells you there is a road 2 kilometers ahead, a road that will take you west, a road that will save your unit. You begin walking. 2 hours later, there is no road, only swamp, black water beneath ice, trees where the map promises open ground. And the sound you hear now, low, distant, growing, is not the wind. It is Soviet artillery correcting its aim. This is the moment the rule begins to break. For decades, German military doctrine had rested on an assumption so fundamental it was never questioned. The map is truth. The Wehrmacht prided itself on precision, surveyed terrain, annotated roads, elevation lines measured to the meter. Staff officers planned operations months in advance using charts refined since the First World War. The map was not a suggestion. It was an authority. Entire campaigns were built on that authority. But now in the East, during the long retreat after Kursk, the maps are lying. Not because they were poorly drawn, but because the world they describe no longer exists. Forests have been logged, villages burned, roads churned into mud by 500,000 boots and tank tracks, rivers redirected by shell fire, swamps expanded by a winter that refuses to freeze cleanly. What once took an hour now takes a day. What once held trucks now swallows them whole. And the men who depend on those maps, men like you, are dying because of it. You do not know it yet, but this disconnect between paper and ground will cripple entire German formations. Divisions will vanish not in battle, but in forests they cannot cross, valleys they cannot find, escape routes that exist only in ink. The German generals will not realize this all at once. They will realize it too late. But in 1944, one young infantryman, freezing and starving on the Eastern Front, begins to understand a truth that high command refuses to accept. The war has moved faster than their maps. And once that realization spreads, everything collapses. You are 19 years old. Your name is Guy Sager. You were born in 1927, the son of a French mother and a German father, raised in Alsace, a borderland that has never truly belonged to one nation for long. When the war comes, it pulls you with it. Not because of ideology, not because of glory, but because history has decided your fate for you. By 1943, you are serving as a Jeffrader, a private first class in the elite Grossdeutschland division. On paper, this is one of Germany's finest formations. Well-equipped, veteran, trusted with the most dangerous sectors of the Eastern Front. In reality, it is bleeding to death. You have already survived Kursk. You have watched Tiger tanks burn. You have seen units reduced from hundreds of men to dozens. And now, in the winter retreats across Ukraine and Poland, you learn that survival no longer depends on courage or firepower. It depends on knowing where you are. The problem is that no one does. The maps you are issued show firm roads, solid bridges, clearly marked villages. They show terrain as it existed before the war, before scorched earth, before artillery reshaped hills, before retreating armies destroyed everything they could not carry. You begin to notice the pattern first during night movements. Orders come down to march 10 kilometers to a supply point. 12 hours later, your column is still wandering through trees, exhausted, lost, and exposed. The supply point is never found. By dawn, Soviet armor appears where the map insists there should be marshland impassable to tanks. You begin to understand something your officers do not want to admit. The enemy is not just advancing faster. The enemy knows the ground better than you do. Local Soviet units navigate by memory, by footpaths never marked on German charts. Partisan guides lead them through forests your maps render as blank green space. What the map calls secondary roads are now artillery corridors. What it calls defensible terrain offers no cover at all. And still, the orders keep coming. Move here, hold there, retreat along this axis, always according to the map. In one march, your battalion is ordered to withdraw through a valley that appears wide and clear on paper. In reality, it has become a frozen bog. Horses collapse first, then trucks, then men. When Soviet shells begin to fall, there is nowhere to run. You lie flat in icy water, listening to shrapnel hiss overhead, wondering how many of you will freeze before the firing stops. This is not an isolated failure. It is systemic. German staff work assumes stable terrain, assumes time to reconnoiter, assumes that what was true last year is still true today. But the Eastern Front is not static. It is violence in motion, and motion destroys accuracy. By late 1943, entire German corps are retreating based on maps that are months, sometimes years, out of date. Intelligence units cannot survey fast enough. Aerial reconnaissance is hampered by weather and Soviet air defenses. Reports from the front are inconsistent, fragmented, often ignored. The result is catastrophe by miscalculation. Units arrive at river crossings that no longer exist. Bridges marked as intact have been blown days earlier. Alternate crossings shown on maps are impassable. While engineers scramble, Soviet spearheads close in. Encirclements form not because of brilliant enemy maneuver, but because German units walk themselves into traps drawn by obsolete information. You experience this not as theory, but as hunger, exhaustion, and fear. You feel it when an officer confidently orders a march that leads nowhere. You hear it when veterans mutter that the map is wrong again. You see it when wounded men are left behind because evacuation routes cannot be found. Slowly, painfully, you realize that the German army is no longer fighting the war it planned for. It is fighting the war that exists, and it is losing. What no one at headquarters wants to admit is that the map, the foundation of maneuver warfare, has become a liability. Decisions made at corps and army level are disconnected from the ground reality faced by men like you. And the longer this denial lasts, the worse the retreats become. Soon, there will be moments when entire divisions are ordered to withdraw along corridors that do not exist. Moments when commanders swear a forest can be crossed in hours, only to watch their units disappear into it for days. Moments when Soviet forces arrive first, not because they moved faster, but because they moved correctly. You are about to live through the worst of it. Because in 1944, as the Red Army launches its massive summer offensives, the distance between German maps and the real terrain will finally become impossible to ignore. And when that happens, the realization will hit German generals with brutal clarity. The war is no longer where they think it is. You move again before dawn. There is no dramatic order, no speech. Just a quiet transmission passed down the frozen line, move west. Immediately. Soviet armor has broken through somewhere north, and the division must reposition before it is cut off. The map says the route is simple: 15 kilometers, one secondary road, 2 forest tracks, a river crossing marked fordable. You believe it because you have to. This is early 1944, and the German army is no longer advancing anywhere in the east. It is contracting, pulling back in jagged lines, abandoning territory faster than headquarters can redraw it. What used to be front lines are now vague zones of contact. What used to be rear areas are suddenly battlefields, and every retreat depends on the map. For German command culture, this is existential. Auftragstactic mission command assumes subordinate leaders can orient themselves, improvise within intent, and maneuver with confidence. That only works if terrain data is reliable. Without it, initiative becomes guesswork. You feel that uncertainty trickle down to your level. Your platoon leader is 23. He has a map case slung over his shoulder, the leather cracked and stiff. He checks it constantly, stopping the column every few minutes, turning it under a flashlight shielded by his hand. Each pause costs heat. Each pause costs morale. You march anyway. Snow crunches underfoot. The temperature sits well below freezing, but the ground beneath the snow is not solid. When you step off the path even slightly, your boot breaks through crust into sucking mud. This is the Eastern Front's cruelty. Winter on the surface, autumn underneath. After 3 hours, you reach the river. On the map, it is a thin blue line. On the ground, it is 20 meters wide, swollen by meltwater, ice flows grinding against one another with a sound like breaking bones. There is no ford. Engineers are called forward, they swear. The officer swears back. Orders crackle over the radio, hold position, then no, move south, then wait. While they argue, Soviet artillery begins probing. Not a barrage, just ranging shots. Whump, whump, each shell lands closer. This is how maps kill men, not dramatically, not all at once, but by freezing them in place while decisions are revised. When the order finally comes, it contradicts the map entirely. You will not cross here. You will turn east, then north, through forest the map marks as light woodland, and link up with another regiment near a village whose name no one can pronounce. You step into the trees. Within minutes, formation breaks down. The forest is nothing like the map suggests. It is dense, tangled, cratered by shellfire. Fallen trunks block movement. Snow hides ditches. Visibility drops to a few meters. You lose sight of the men ahead of you, then the men behind. This is the moment fear changes shape, not the fear of bullets, the fear of being lost. You know from experience what that means now. Lost units do not get resupplied. Lost units do not get orders. Lost units are found later, captured, dead, or not at all. Somewhere to your left, a machine gun opens up, not close enough to see, close enough to hear the flat, mechanical rhythm. You drop, heart pounding, fingers numb on the rifle stock. No one knows where the enemy is. No one knows where you are. And the map is useless. This is not unique to your division. Across the Eastern Front, German formations are experiencing the same breakdown. During the winter and spring of 1944, retreat routes collapse repeatedly because planned corridors are impassable. Swamps marked as frozen are not. Roads marked as paved are cratered beyond use. Villages used as landmarks no longer exist. Staff officers respond by doubling down on planning, issuing more detailed orders based on the same faulty data. The result is paralysis. Then in June 1944, the reckoning arrives. Operation Bagration begins. The Red Army unleashes more than 2 million men against Army Group Center. Entire German corps are smashed in days. But the destruction is not only due to overwhelming force. It is amplified by disorientation. German units attempt to withdraw according to prearranged plans. They move toward assembly areas that Soviet forces already occupy. They attempt to use road networks that no longer function. They funnel into forests and marshes because the maps say those areas are passable. They are not. Encirclements form faster than anyone anticipates. Radio contact is lost. Commanders issue orders that arrive hours late to units already surrounded. You hear fragments of this chaos through rumor and retreating stragglers. Entire divisions gone, generals captured, headquarters overrun. And still you march by the map. One night, after 48 hours without proper food, your column reaches what should be a crossroads. According to the map, 4 routes converge here. According to reality, there is nothing. Just churned earth and tree stumps. You watch officers argue under a lantern. Voices rise. Accusations fly. Someone says the map must be wrong. Someone else says the scouts are incompetent. No one wants to say the obvious truth. The ground has changed faster than the army can understand it. This is when the realization finally begins to move upward. Field commanders start reporting not enemy strength, but terrain unreliability. They describe maps as theoretical. They warn that retreat timelines are meaningless. Some units begin navigating by local guides, by captured Soviet maps, by instinct. High command resists. Admitting the maps are wrong means admitting loss of control, but the evidence piles up. By late 1944, German operational planning in the East is crippled. Orders are shorter, more desperate. Hold as long as possible. Break out if encircled. Specific routes are no longer specified because specifying them has become dangerous. For you, the infantryman, this shift offers no relief. You are still cold, still hungry, still walking through terrain that refuses to match expectations. But now you understand something fundamental. The army you serve no longer sees the battlefield clearly. And an army that cannot see cannot maneuver. You survive that winter. Many do not. Not because they lack courage, not because they lack weapons, but because they are led into spaces that no longer exist. Years later, when you write about this time, you will not focus on grand strategy. You will focus on exhaustion, on the humiliation of trusting a map that betrays you, on the quiet terror of realizing that paper promises safety the earth will not deliver. Because that is the moment everything changes. Not when the first shell falls, but when the map lies and no one knows what to trust instead. You are moving again, always moving. There is no front line now, only pressure. Soviet pressure that never releases, only shifts. Every step west feels borrowed. It is summer 1944. The thaw has turned roads into rivers of mud. The forests that betrayed you in winter now suffocate you in green. Insects swarm. Sweat replaces frost. The map case still hangs at your officer's side, but it is consulted less and less. When it is opened, it only confirms what everyone already knows. The map no longer corresponds to survival. Your regiment receives orders to break contact and withdraw before Soviet armor closes the gap. The route is marked clearly: 18 kilometers, 2 villages, 1 narrow defile that leads to open ground. You begin at dusk. Within the first kilometer, the column stretches in fragments. Vehicles bog down. Horses scream as they collapse. You abandon equipment to move faster. Soviet artillery begins falling behind you, harassing fire, walking forward, pushing you into motion like a whip. At 5 kilometers, the first village should appear. It does not. You pass burned foundations, charred beams, a well filled with rubble. The landmark the map relies on is gone. With it goes orientation. The officer halts the column. He checks his compass. He checks the map. He checks the sky. Nothing aligns. You hear engines to the south, tanks, not German. The order comes fast now. Change direction, 30 degrees north. Move through the woods. This is how encirclements happen. You enter the trees just as Soviet shells crash into the empty road you were supposed to be on. The timing feels intentional, as if the enemy knew where you would be, because you were predictable, because you followed the map. Inside the forest, the ground rises unexpectedly. The map shows gentle elevation. In reality, shellfire has carved ravines and thrown earth into jagged ridges. Movement slows to a crawl. Men stumble, packs tear loose. Someone breaks an ankle. He is left behind with a rifle and 2 magazines. You do not look back. The sound of battle closes in from 3 sides now. You are not retreating anymore. You are trying to escape. Hours pass. Water runs out. Ammunition is counted in tens, not hundreds. You reach what should be the defile, the narrow passage that opens onto clear ground. Instead, you find a choke point already under Soviet control. Machine guns rake the tree line. Mortars thump with mechanical certainty. The enemy is exactly where the map says they should not be. You hit the ground as bullets snap overhead. Bark explodes from trunks. Men scream. An officer tries to rally a push through the gap and is cut down mid-sentence. This is the moment failure becomes unavoidable. You are trapped by terrain that no longer exists as described. Someone shouts to fall back. Someone else shouts there is nowhere to fall back to. The forest behind you is filling with enemy infantry. You hear Russian voices now, close, confident. The map has led you into a pocket. Time compresses. 10 minutes feel like seconds. Decisions are made without consultation. You and a handful of others crawl through underbrush toward a shallow ravine not marked on any chart. It smells of rot and stagnant water. You slide into it, bodies pressed into mud, bullets cracking overhead. You wait. This is where the countdown begins. Footsteps. Closer. You count breaths. 1, 2, 3. A Soviet soldier appears at the ravine edge. You see his boots first, then his knees. He is not cautious. He does not need to be. You fire. The rifle bucks. The man falls forward, sliding into the mud not 2 meters from you. Another appears, then another. The ravine erupts in sound, rifle cracks, shouts, the wet impact of bodies. You do not know how long it lasts. 5 minutes, 10. You reload mechanically, fingers slick, heart hammering. Then suddenly it stops. Silence falls in a way that feels unnatural. You wait for the next wave, it does not come. Later you realize what happened. The Soviets bypassed you. They did not need to clear every pocket. Their maps, based on fresh reconnaissance and local knowledge, told them where to go next. You were already irrelevant. You crawl out at nightfall with 3 others. Your regiment is gone, not destroyed in a single battle, dispersed, broken, lost to terrain no one understood. This is happening everywhere. During the summer and autumn of 1944, German Army Group Center ceases to exist as a coherent force. Hundreds of thousands of men are killed or captured. Retreats turn into routes not because of cowardice, but because command and control collapses. And command and control collapses because orientation collapses. Maps are redrawn constantly. New additions arrive weeks late. By the time they reach the front, the ground has already changed again. German generals begin issuing orders without routes, without timelines, only intent. Delay the enemy. Break through to the west. It is not doctrine, it is desperation. For men like you, the war becomes a sequence of escapes, forest to forest, river to river, always just ahead of encirclement, always guided by rumor, instinct, and whatever fragment of terrain still makes sense. At one point, you march for 2 days following a river because water does not lie. It flows where it flows. When the map says the river bends north, but it bends south, you trust the river. That decision saves your life. And this is the great, unspoken reversal of the Eastern Front. German soldiers stop trusting their own system. They stop trusting the map. Midway through this realization, the truth becomes unavoidable. If you find this kind of forgotten military detail as fascinating as we do, we'd be honored if you'd hit that subscribe button. We believe these stories of endurance and collapse deserve to be told. And by subscribing, you help us ensure they aren't forgotten. The war grinds on. By early 1945, Germany is retreating everywhere. But the East remains uniquely brutal because it denies clarity. Even now, with defeat certain, orders still arrive based on terrain assumptions that no longer apply. You cross rivers that are not marked. You skirt villages erased from records. You navigate by smoke columns and the sound of guns. When you finally reach the Oder, you are barely recognizable as a soldier. Your uniform hangs loose. Your boots are mismatched. Your rifle is a stranger in your hands, but you are alive. And you know something now that generals learned too late. Wars are not lost only by force. They are lost when the space between plan and reality becomes unbridgeable. When maps lie long enough, armies walk themselves into oblivion. The Oder is wide, gray, and honest. It does not pretend to be smaller than it is. It does not promise easy crossings. It simply exists, cold, slow, indifferent. You reach it in January 1945 with thousands of others who have drifted west by instinct more than command. Here, at last, the German army stops pretending it controls the ground. Orders still come, but they are stripped of illusion. Hold until ammunition runs out. Destroy bridges after crossing. Delay for hours, not days. No one mentions precise routes anymore. No one references contour lines or road classifications. The map has been reduced to a rough sketch. This is the ripple effect of that earlier failure. The moment when German generals finally understood that their operational picture had collapsed. What they did not know, until it was too late, was how completely this blindness had already reshaped the war. In the East, the Red Army learned to exploit terrain fluidity. Soviet commanders planned not around fixed roads, but around possibilities. They used local guides. They updated maps continuously. They accepted uncertainty as normal. German command culture never fully adapted. During the final retreats, entire defensive plans unraveled because terrain assumptions failed under pressure. Units arrived late, exhausted, or not at all. Reserves meant to counterattack emerged from forests days behind schedule. Artillery was emplaced where fields had turned to swamps. Every delay compounded the next. The true impact of the map failure would not be understood until after the war, when analysts examined why German units so often collapsed during withdrawal despite fighting effectively when static. The answer was not morale. It was not training. It was orientation. An army that cannot place itself in space cannot synchronize movement. An army that cannot synchronize movement cannot resist a faster enemy. By the time Berlin becomes the final objective, German command no longer tries to maneuver on a grand scale. It reacts, always reacting, always late. For you, the war ends not in a dramatic last stand, but in exhaustion. In April 1945, somewhere west of the Oder, you surrender. There is no map involved in that decision, only hunger, only the knowledge that movement has finally run out. You survive captivity. You survive the war. Years later, you write. You write not as a general, not as a strategist, but as a man who walked where maps failed. You write about fear that had nothing to do with bullets, the fear of being lost in a system that no longer understood itself. Guy Sager lives long enough to see his memoir read around the world. To this day, his account remains one of the most intimate descriptions of what collapse feels like from the ground level. Not collapse by explosion, collapse by erosion. This story matters now because modern warfare still depends on information matching reality. Satellites replace paper, digital maps replace ink, but the lesson remains unchanged. When decision makers trust representations more than ground truth, disaster follows. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Every click tells the algorithm this piece of history is worth remembering. We're dedicated to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us on this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment with your city or state and tell us if someone in your family served. Thank you for ensuring that Guy Sager and the countless unnamed men of the Grossdeutschland division do not disappear into silence. They deserve to be remembered.